in 5, 4, 3. And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050, WTKA, online at WTKA.com. Sam Webb, Mr. Ira Weintraub on the other side, and joining us as they do every single Thursday, the MGoBlog Roundtable crew. You see them over on MGoBlog doing their thing. They join us every Thursday at the 9 o'clock hour to talk about many topics in the world of Maize and Blue sports. We always start off first with the man that started it all over at the blog, and that is our good friend Brian Cook. Brian, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well.
We have Seth Fisher. Seth, how are you?
Brady Hart, Brady.
Gotta love that dude already. Yep. Already, he gets it, right? We'll talk about Brady Hart a little bit later. And then, of course, one Mr. Craig Ross. I ended with you on purpose, Craig, because we delayed story time with Craig last week. We weren't going to deny story time with Craig. So, Craig Ross, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm in Kona, so that's why it's dark here. It's whatever it is, 3 a.m. here. I play golf. This is the difference between transactional and transformational in a sort of everyday way. And I play golf now and again with my brother John, who's been on this show once or twice, and a guy in Ann Arbor, Brad, who's as kind and gentle and thoughtful a person as I've ever met. Brad will give you the shirt off his back, will spend his time on you if you need it, but he's not a good golfer, to say the least. Mostly he rides around in a court, looks for balls, and occasionally hits a ball, very occasionally. But we play communist golf. We play, wherever, and we play against the course, or we don't keep score or whatever. Well, we're playing down in Toledo on a not great course, but a fun course. And I don't hit the ball very far. I'm not a very good golfer either. So I wear fancy clothes.
Oh, that's
I wear
he's describing me.
Yeah. This is sort of a lot like Sam. This is a Sam story, actually. In fact, it's got lots of Sam in it. And so I'm wearing a DeChambeau old style hat, Payne Stewart knickers, Argyle socks, a fancy Tommy Bahama shirt. So I ain't no good, but I at least look good. So Sam's shaking his head. Yeah. So I hit on the third hole. It's a 480-yard, 470-yard par 5. I hit the biggest drive I've hit in 10 years. Where it came from, I have no idea. But I hit it 250 yards in a perfect spot. And so I go up to the ball, and there's a pond in front of this green, big old pond, marshy area. And I think, I'm about 220 away. If I hit the best 3-wood in my life and I curl it around the pond, I might be able to get on this par 5 and 2. And my brother hooked his ball in the woods. I don't know what he's doing. He's off in the woods someplace. And so I hit the 3-wood, and of course I hit it okay, but not great. And it doesn't curl around the pond. It curls, I think, into the pond. So my brother looks for my spot to hit a ball, and I'm walking. John and I walk. Brad takes a cart. So Brad steams up to the pond in the cart, and I walk up to the pond, and I don't know what Brad's doing. He's puttering around the back of the pond, and I find my ball, and it's sitting on top of a giant black snake. This is no joke. The biggest snake I've ever seen in my life, and there's the ball. So I don't know exactly how to play a ball off a snake, or, and while I'm pondering this, I hear this noise. Brad has fallen into the pond, but it's just not the pond. It's like mud. It's this green, black, slimy mud, and he can't get out. He can't get any purchase in the pond. And it's like one of the old jungle movies where, you're in quicksand and the guy can't get out. So I go over there with a club and try and pull him out. I can't get him out. John, meanwhile, has hit a great shot from my spot up near the green. And I And I yell at John, and he goes, "What's going on?" We come over, and with 2 clubs, we try and pull him out, one with each hand, but he just flops forward into the mud. Finally, we pull him out. He gets out. He's covered from like his neck down in this black, green, brown, slimy goo. That was, now most people would go home and call it a day. Not Brad. He decides he's going to play which means putting a ball occasionally, chipping a ball occasionally, driving around this cart. Then in the parking lot after this round, here's the point of the story. I'm in the parking lot putting clubs in the car. Brad is putting his stuff in his car. I don't know where my brother's at. And this woman drives up by me, rolls her window down, and says, do you know where the amphitheater is? And I say, I have no idea where the amphitheater is. I said, look, I'm from Ann Arbor, not Toledo. I'm down here golfing with my brother. Well, very nice person. We start to have a conversation. She's a golfer. She's a good tennis player. And she says to me, "Did you graduate from Michigan?" I said, "Yeah, I did." And then she said, "Well, I did too. I went to Michigan too." "What year did you graduate?" She names a date that's like 22 years after me. So we're chatting. And as we're chatting, Brad walks up, still covered with muck and goo. I mean, if you know the Tom Waits song, smell like a brewery, look like a tramp. And the woman says to me, "Are you single?" And I say, "No, I'm not single." And then she says to me, "Is your brother single?" Now, she hasn't seen my brother. My brother's nowhere to be. I don't know where he's at. He's in the, and at this point, Brad, who you got to give credit to, really, says, "I'm single." She looks at Brad, who's covered with muck and looks awful. I mean, Brad isn't, he's younger than me, but he's still not a young guy. And he's covered with mud and brown stuff. And she just looks at him like he's Kongorilla. Like, what? And so that's sort of the end of the story. But it struck me that, maybe Brad sort of was a sort of transformational character. He goes, he's a kind, smart, thoughtful person. He goes home, he gets cleaned up, he takes the muck and goo off himself, puts on some nice clothes. Well, all of a sudden, maybe, this woman would say, okay, but, in some context, me and even my unseen brother, who's just in door number 3 at that point, are transactional to her. So in this sense, this is the difference between transactional and transformational, and why show me the money is always going to have more purchase than, well, maybe if you come here and we clean you up, you can, make some money. So these things happen in everyday life, and this happened in my everyday life last week.
I think I get it. I think I get it. But Craig, I guess my main takeaway is you're getting hit on the golf course, man. Wow.
That's the whole point of this story.
It isn't really. I tried to figure out a way to.
Craig was getting hit on the golf course. Some lady was like, "Ooh, Craig."
I would say there is definitely an ulterior motive.
I would point out that my brother was also getting hit on, and he was in the clubhouse. Right?
I don't even know how to segue from that.
Hey, got through 20 minutes of the show.
I guess we could talk some recruiting, because I asked you guys last week, did you agree with it being panic time? As many of the fans were panicking about Michigan's pedestrian recruiting ranking. Now, still fairly early in the cycle, but a lot of the teams, fairly early when you consider that the signing day is still 6 months away. But a lot of teams are, farther along with their recruiting classes than Michigan. And so you understand where some of the concern was coming from based on the fact that Michigan was coming off a national championship. But all of you guys to a man said, be patient. Some good things are going to happen. There's still plenty of time for Michigan to ascend in the rankings. And then lo and behold, Brian Cook, they pick up some good news that we actually forecast. One piece anyway that we forecast last week with the addition of Kainoa Winston.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this last week, but there are a lot of extenuating circumstances for Sharon Moore. Like, first of all, you're going to the national championship game, so while most teams who aren't in the playoff are pretty much just like, okay, the bowl exists, but we're going to focus on recruiting for all of December and January, wasn't an option. And then there was the extended will he or won't he, Harbaugh leaving process, and then Sharon has to get together his staff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of this combined with the fact that Harbaugh flirted with the NFL for the previous couple of years is just puts you in a situation where it's going to take some time for you to catch up. And I expect this class to be, decent, but not what you want ideally for a Michigan class. But they picked up a 2026 quarterback who has a real Michigan name.
Right.
In Brady Hart, and so that's a good start to that class. That you get that quarterback, he starts pulling it together. And I think that class is really going to be where you see, whatever Sharon Moore has been able to do in terms of staffing up his recruiting operation, his lack of interest from the NFL, all that stuff. I think will start paying off in next year's class. And this year's class is it's a bridge class, right? So you want to get from the current roster to whatever Sharon Moore's is going to look like in a couple of years. And like, we need to be realistic is that a lot of guys are off the board. A lot of guys aren't considering Michigan for reasons that don't have anything to do with Michigan, but just the circumstance they found themselves in. So panic in the immediate aftermath of a national championship is a sign of a diseased mind. Right? Like, there's people who are like, oh no, it's like, what? No, stop. Anything can happen this year and it's fine. Like, just chill out.
Yeah. Seth, I started singing when we were talking about Brady Hart, or when you mentioned Brady Hart's name. But Brian is right. That's how a recruiting class is made, with the top quarterback, but a top quarterback that has some runway to recruit a class. The best examples of that at Michigan have been quarterbacks that have been able to recruit for over a year, like JJ McCarthy, like Drew Henson, right? Guys who committed in their junior campaigns and then were able to help lure others in the class. And you got a guy in Brady Hart who's going to have that kind of runway, even more so with him.
Yeah. Oh man, I mean, if you haven't had fun yet with Brady Hart's commitment, start following some of the things that start following his Ohio State trip, where he was, I guess, on the phone with JJ McCarthy while he was at Ohio State, and then he leaves, and they're like, "What do you think of Ohio State?" He's like, "Well, not everyone's got the same culture as Michigan." So I'm loving the guy already. I also kind of wanted to go back to what Brian was talking about there. If you look at where Michigan was in the middle of June, like June 20th, 2022, 2 years ago. This is after Michigan's beaten Ohio State twice in a row. This is Michigan looking like the best team in the country. So you join this class, you have a good shot of getting a ring. Their class at that point was 3-star Brooks Barr, low 3-star running back Ben Hall, and 5-star Raylan Wilson, who everyone knew was leaving the class. That was the class at that point. And that class comes together later, but it was the similar issues, right? They don't know if they're going to have Jim Harbaugh. They don't know what's going to happen with the program next. Even offensive linemen were wondering if Sharon Moore is going to get picked off. If Harbaugh sticks around, is Sharon going to be a head coach somewhere else? And then that class comes together. They get Jair Hill. They get Trey Pierce. They get some guys who are really going to help them. But it doesn't end up being a top class you do need that quarterback. And Brady Hart really, because how many teams wanted him, right? Florida wanted him. Florida can't get their stuff together, but he's the son of a Florida baseball player. Notre Dame decided they had to move on. Ohio State wanted him. So this was when you start with a 5-star quarterback, and we're close to 5-star quarterback, when you start with that guy and he can bring people in and say, hey, we're going to win together. Now you have that story too, right? And that's how Clemson was building their classes. They would get Trevor Lawrence in the class first, and he would say, come with me. And that's what JJ did. And you can show that it works. You need that 5-star quarterback. And I think there never was a moment to panic. But classes used to not come together until, the summer anyway. It's just the way things have been going lately.
Yeah, it's an interesting circumstance. I sort of likened it to that time where when Beeline had the 4 point guards he was recruiting. It was Derek Walton, it was Monte Morris, and why am I trying to remember the guy who wound up at Notre Dame, the point guard who wound up at Notre Dame in that cycle? You guys remember? It'll come to me.
No.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are 3 top point guards, and they had them all on campus at the same time, and it was like, okay, we got to figure out how this is going to go. They wound up offering Monte Morris first, but he delayed. They offered the other 2. The one kid committed to Notre Dame, and Derek Walton wound up jumping on it before Monte Morris, who is disappointed. Michigan and Kirk Campbell had kind of the same dynamic coming up, because all these quarterback recruits, 26 quarterback recruits, were slated to be on campus within a 3-day span of each other, starting with Brady Hart. Brady Smigel was coming in. Troy Hune was on campus. He was on campus. He was actually visiting. Brady Smigel was coming in. Jaden O'Neal was coming in. These are all top quarterbacks in the 26 class. And so, but Brady Hart was first. And he leaves and he goes to Ohio State. And you got to know, if you're Brady Hart, if you wait, things could kind of get away from him, because Smigel had been to campus before. He seemed to be really high on Michigan. He was probably the likeliest to maybe do something. So if you know that's where you want to be, you got to make a decision. And I think the order of the visits is telling too, that they went with getting Brady Hart in first, because you look at it, he's the youngest of the bunch. Like, he's a full year younger than Brady Smigel, even though they're the same year, right? He's the 1-year starter. So his first year as a starter, he goes out and quarterbacks his team to a state title. I think you look at him and you see that he's done a ton in a short period of time, and there's more room for growth. They're all 26s. They all have a lot of growing to do, and they will do. But Brady Hart seems the farthest away from his ceiling, given his age and given it was his first year as a starter. And I think those, in part, and then the connection with the family, and I think those were the things that put Brady Hart over the top when it came to a crew of 4 really good quarterbacks. The ones they probably had the best shots with were Smigel and Hune. I think Jaden O'Neal is going to go to Oklahoma, and I think he's going to go to Oklahoma even if he had visited Michigan. But I think it's very clear that Brady Hart was the preference.
Well, he moves. I will say this from my view of him: he has a strong arm, obviously, and he's big. He's pretty skinny, but he's tall, so he needs to fill out a bit. He will, but he moves really well in the pocket. He's not a runner, as far as I can tell, but he can move around in the pocket and evade a pass rush. That's nice. The other guys they got in the last, since we talked, were Kanoa Winston, who Sam predicted a week ago. And he's a top 100 player to everybody, I think. And the safety, and Jalen Williams, who's one of the best 5 players to everybody in Illinois. And then Jasper Parker, who's not as highly rated, but I looked at his film. He's got good feet. He's got good vision. The big thing there is he's a really nice receiver. I mean, he can catch the ball and run patterns. And he's not a burner, but he's fast enough. And I would put him potentially, maybe, if things work out for him well and he develops, in the Karan Higdon range. He reminded me a bit of Karan Higdon in his style. But so I know there's been a lot of panic on Michigan recruiting, but I don't think it's really warranted at this point. It's a long way to go, and it's hard to see what the future will look like. If you look at average recruiting, if you are into these things, and if you look at the average number of stars or points that sites give, Michigan is number 8 on both sides, on both of the big sites. And so as they fill the class in, their ranking will bump up. I suspect it'll look historically like it's has in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, there's some interesting recruiting stuff. And about Jasper Parker, I mean, the most conspicuous thing is LSU hasn't offered him. I wonder if I don't know all the dynamics of that. Is it just a guy that they think they can swoop in on later? But his offer list reads like a who's who. Like, he has everyone else. He has Bama and Auburn. He has Florida State and Miami and Penn State and Tennessee and USC. I mean, the dude has a decorated offer list. He just doesn't have a LSU. And you watch his film and it's like, you see why. It's like, man, I get it. This dude looks legit. Michigan's going to take 2 backs in the class. Jordan Davison, I'm sure they would like for him to be the other back. He still has an Ohio State visit coming up. But Ohio State
have any room left for running backs? They got 2 in the class already.
To keep him from Michigan? Yeah, sure they do. Sure they do.
Well, no,
I think that Michigan really did an outstanding job on Jordan Davison's visit. And if they get him, Buckeyes are gonna say that it's because they got 2 running backs in the class. But I think if they get him, it will be something that was determined. It would have been determined long before they got their second running back. That's how I think it will. That's what I think the true story will be. But time will tell there. Interesting recruitment for me. 2 of the guys who were here last week. Jadon Blair is a top 247 player, an elite safety target. Has all the big timers, visiting Florida State this weekend, but I think it's a Michigan-Notre Dame battle, and I can't really read the dude. I mean, I think he likes Michigan a ton. I think his parents like Michigan a ton. They have clearly identified him as the other safety in the class, or they would like him to be the other safety in the class, but he is really enamored with Marcus Freeman. They have him on this, you can be the next Kyle Hamilton, but better guy. And that's kind of resonating with him a little bit. But an interesting thing that he said, the reason why I bring up his recruitment, I want to bounce this thing off of you. I said, so tell me about NIL. And he was like, oh man, Michigan's NIL is amazing. He's like, they're talking about all the things that they could do with me, and it's outstanding. I said, so they aren't lagging. He said they are lagging behind no one in NIL. It's like, oh, that's an interesting one, considering who the other schools are on his list. When you got a Notre Dame who's done pretty well in that category. You got the Florida schools who have done well in that category. And here you have this kid saying the NIL at Michigan is on par with those. So wonder what you guys make of the Jadon Blair recruitment.
Well, I don't know. I still worry a bit that we're covered with black and green slime from the neck down. But I just don't know. I mean, Sam. I mean, maybe Seth and Brian know. I don't know.
I think it's Michigan Notre Dame. He has one Notre Dame prediction. I think I came out of the interview.
Is it Loy?
Probably. Probably. Yes, it is Loy, as a matter of fact.
There we go. I love Tom Loy. He's just.
It is Loy.
If you do any recruiting, my favorite thing is when Michigan goes after a guy that Notre Dame wants as well. First of all, because you guys have a couple really good scouts for Notre Dame. Was it Prister and Sinclair, who are great at breakdowns and give me exactly the quotes I need. But also because Tom Loy is always there, just being like, well, I think he's just a Notre Dame kind of guy because he likes academics. He's got good parents. So I'm going to put in a prediction of level 6 crystal ball for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think that this visit really did something with his parents. It's about bridging the relationship gap with Notre Dame, in my opinion. I couldn't read whether they had done enough. As a matter of fact, I came out of it thinking that he was a slight Notre Dame lean, but some of the things that he's saying to people in Michigan recruiting class circles makes me think that might be off, and that it could be Michigan leading coming out of that visit. So I really don't have a good read there. The other guy who was on campus here recently, who I don't think that there's a make or break recruit. Like, if they don't get this guy, it's a bad class. But I think if they get him, he's the biggest land in the class, in my opinion, because I think he's underranked and he's the number 68 player in the country. I love Shamari Earls. I think he is a tremendous prospect. Every bit of 6'2", 203. I think 24/7 has him rated as the number 8 corner. He's committed to South Carolina. He was giving Michigan the stiff arm real hard because he had heard they had negative recruited Steve Clinkscale really well. He even said that it's one of the most candid interviews I've done, where he was like, yeah, I heard some bad things about Clinkscale. My coach heard some bad things about him too. He's like, I think he's a good guy, but we heard some bad things. And so he wasn't giving Michigan the time of day, to the point where, Lamar Morgan had to think he was spinning his wheels because the dude was not responding to any of his messages, but he kept recruiting him, to the point where the kid's dad was like, man, we got to give this dude a chance. He just won't stop. And so they come up on a visit and they love it. They love the fit. They love being able to step in for Will Johnson. And you love his recruiting profile as a big corner who can run. He's a 10-600 meter guy, 21-6 200 meter guy. He's an inch off the long jump record, Noah Lyles' long jump record in the state of Virginia. He tied with Nick Harbor in the 55. Like, this is an elite athlete who I would be shocked if he stays with South Carolina. He's talking all this stuff about Beamer and how, Beamer, I don't think he really handled this the right way with me wanting to take other visits. I just want to make sure this is the right spot. So he moved my official visit to South Carolina around. I don't think it was fair to other schools. Think it was kind of dirty. All that adds up to, I don't think he's going to South Carolina. And so if he's not going to South Carolina, he told me it's going to be between South Carolina, Michigan, and Georgia, which in my opinion makes this a Michigan-Georgia battle. Now, do you believe that Michigan can beat Georgia for a corner when every corner they've squared off for in the last 2 cycles, Georgia has won? If they were going to get one of all these corners, Brian, Seth, and Craig, this would be the one that I want. If they get this dude, I think he's a top 25 player in this country. He's not ranked there right now, but that's how good I think he's going to be.
I mean, you just said, Jadon Blair said the Michigan's NIL is on par with anybody. Let's see. You're going against Georgia? If you want to test your NIL capabilities, go against Georgia and South Carolina. Because South Carolina will throw a big chunk at the end there. And I think Shamari Earls is friends with Nick Harbor, right? Like those guys, yes. They train together, they run together. I think Nick Harbor was more like his future is going to be an Olympic athlete, where Earls is, I'm more focused on football. But yeah, dude, I just, we are waiting to see Michigan win a battle of, where you're going after Lee. I know it's not all about money, but their money has to be, equal to the kind of things that get thrown around, and the way things are done in those levels of recruitments, because Michigan's not been in those areas. And I think Georgia thinks he's a top 25 guy too. So, show me it happening. Right, I got to see them win one of those battles, and this is going to like a signing day battle, right? This is like going to be.
Well, it's not going to be. He wants to make his final decision before the season, whether he flips or stays with South Carolina. Which staying with South Carolina would be the most shocking decision of them all, in my opinion. But he said something that really made me think that, they got a shot against Georgia in this, and it's not the NIL thing. I'm going to get NIL wherever I go. I've heard kids say that before, and a lot of times it winds up being an NIL thing, right? So it's not that. He was talking about A&M, and he said, you know, they got 4 4-star corners committed in their class. He said, I can go there and compete. I can go anywhere in the country and compete with anyone. I'm not scared of it. But they don't need me. They don't need me at A&M. They got 4 4-star corners in the class. I'd rather go someplace where they need me to. They want me and they need me. I'm looking at Georgia's corner room. They don't have a corner in the class, but you look at their corners the last 2 cycles, and they've taken it to Michigan for 3 of them. I think they have 6 like top 100 corners in the last 2 classes. So if you just put those statistics up, if you're Michigan, not to disparage your room, but if you're just looking at the rankings of the rooms, like, dude, and Will Johnson's going to the league.
Yeah.
Like, we need you right now. And I think based on what he said, because that's what pushed A&M sort of down his list, was that thing. Well, hey, if that's really a factor, young fella, then I would think that would give Michigan an advantage over Georgia.
Well, it sure seems so. I mean, with Will Johnson, assuming he has a good year, and I assume he will, is going to be in the first round of the draft, and probably the earlier parts of the first round of the draft. And Michigan has a huge need there. Can they compete? Are they willing to compete for the kid? And if they are, you would think we would have there's a lot of arguments. There's a lot of arguments for Michigan. There's a person here who said, like your glass half full thought, Sam, but it's Georgia. They pay well. Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's what regardless of what people say, that's it's a transaction.
I mean, I'm sure Will Johnson is among the top paid athletes.
Yes.
In college football this year.
No question.
So yeah. So I mean, I could see where, Michigan has a case for Shamari Earls that, like, you're going to be fine. Because if he's doing, what Will Johnson's doing, he's going to be in good shape. Both in like the real NIL and in the, we're going to make sure you get the money kind of NIL. It's just, I mean, Georgia's fought those wars so many times. They know exactly how to win that kind of thing. So if Georgia's as committed as Michigan to this thing, it's very hard to, dislodge Napoleon.
Yeah. We shall see. It's going to be put to the test. He'll be there this weekend. And then does he schedule a return official to Michigan? He said that it's looking like he will. If he does, that's a great sign. Great sign. They can get him back on campus again coming up here in July. So time will tell. In the meantime, in between time, we need to get to a break. Back on the other side with more MGoBlog Roundtable here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, The Ticket.
And we are clear on the radio.
Yeah, he says, I think Jaden Sanders can be just as good as Shamari. I think he's a really good player. I think as an athlete, an overall athlete, 6'2", 203, can run like that, can jump like that. I just think the ceiling is so high. It's so high. And Jaden Sanders is a good player. Like he was there yesterday. Michigan is in that recruitment, but dude, if I had to choose one, I'd choose Shamari Earls. So
yeah.
We'll see.
Here's why I
hey man. Hey, old Zach, I give old Zach good content. I'm a content driver for Zach Smith.
I missed your whole thing. You had a thing with Zach Smith?
I always have a thing with Zach Smith. Zach Smith he can't coach anymore. No program in the country will ever hire him again. And so I said he's a podcaster / sex toy tester. That's what he does with his time now, because he can't coach football. He has to do this with a very, very limited and crazy audience. And so he needs content. So he kind of draws me in. And they were talking about a Jordan Davison interview that I did with his trainer. Mm-hmm. And his trainer was talking about, he said Michigan knocked it out of the park. They did a good job. NIL. He too said the NIL wasn't lagging, that it was on par with everyone else. So they did a great job there. And so for some reason, he got it in his mind and was telling his followers that I made up the quotes in an interview that I recorded. Like, just be more of an idiot than you are. I didn't think it was possible to be more of an idiot than you are, than I thought you were. And here we are. So that started the whole thing. And I don't know what else is going on. I get the things that people send to me, so I didn't see what he said lately. But I'm sure I'll hear about it coming up.
I like to compare that with MGoBlog readers. Last week I said that opera and punk rock were a lot alike, and about 3 people posted that was stupid, but they got it. And but then I was criticized heavily for mentioning people that they thought were not really punk rockers. They were really part of the new wave group that followed punk. I have to admit they were probably right. And one person even said, "Hey, you talked about the Kent Akron bar scene and you didn't mention the waitresses." And I love the waitresses, but you can't. There's a lot of people in that music scene at that particular point in time who are quite good. And anyway,
30 seconds, guys.
I love the criticism that really these guys were new wave and not punk. That's the sort of stuff that I appreciate. Not what you endure with Zach Smith.
There's also a diary, which is our term for a user-created feature called "The Big Ten and the Revolutions of 1848."
Yeah,
So
I saw that.
Things talked about.
Here we go, guys.
Right.
Yeah.
That isn't you, was it, Seth?
No.
No.
And we are back on radio in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider, Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTK.com. Sam Webb, Ira Weintraub on the other side of the MGoBlog Roundtable crew. If you're in the market for a new vehicle, get on board with Brighton Ford by going to BrightonFord.com. Call 1-800-NEW-FORD to make it out to the lot at 8240 West Grand River Avenue in Brighton, Michigan. So John Cuter and his crew will take great care of you with deals like the one on the 2024 Ford Bronco Sport Big Bend, $278 a month with $3,500 down, or $405 a month with $500 down. The 2024 Ford Explorer XLT, $210 a month with $3,500 down, or $333 a month with $500 down. And last but not least, that award-winning pickup, the Ford F-150 XLT, still have some 2023s left on the lot at $230 a month with $3,500 down, and some 2024s, of course, on the lot at $251 a month with $3,500 down. For those and other great deals, get on board with Brighton Ford. We're going to BrightonFord.com. Call 1-800-NEW-FORD. I make it out to the lot at 8240 West Grand River Avenue in Brighton, Michigan. We continue to survey the college football area. We started with our previews yesterday with Steve Clark. We went over Texas like I did with you guys last week. Reference my interview with Feinbaum again. He's like, "Hey, man, what do you think about these Pac-12 teams and how they're going to adapt? Like who's going to impose upon whom?" And I'm curious what you guys, I'm going to discount UCLA and what they're going to be down this year. But how do you think USC and Oregon, two teams that Michigan will face? Obviously, of course, everyone predicted that was going to happen. But how do you think those two teams will fare in this year's Big Ten?
Well, for USC, it's a question of like how quickly can they get their defense off the ground? Because Lincoln Riley has never ever has he had a single good defense in the history of his career as a head coach? Probably not. But they get rid of Alex Grinch. They bring in the guy from UCLA who had an excellent year with the Bruins, despite the fact that everybody apparently hates Chip Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's going to be a one-year reclamation project, and I think they're going to have a pretty tough time against the Big Ten teams that are dedicated to pounding it out on the ground. So I don't know if they play Minnesota, but I think that would be a matchup that initially you're looking at as like, okay, USC should handle this team, but could be a lot closer than that. And Oregon, I think, is much better prepared to compete immediately. Like Dan Lanning is a guy who seems to know what he's got at Oregon. They've played pretty well defensively. They've been good. Their season last year was actually significantly, well, I wouldn't say significantly, but it's Washington that ends up in the national title game because they beat Oregon a couple of times. But if you look at their overall body of work, they're not that different. And Oregon's offense didn't get rated as much, and they imported Dylan Gabriel to play quarterback. So they will be a threat to win the conference.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a couple of these teams are already big teams. I mean, you look who's in the middle of that Oregon defense. It's Iowa linebacker Justin Jacobs, right? Like and Washington played Michigan a couple of times. Like we got to see exactly kind of what that team is like.
Oregon?
No. When we played, I'm talking about Washington too. I know Washington lost a ton of players, but it's not like Washington was already a Big Ten team as well, right? They had Kalen DeBoer building that team, and now they've got another former Big Ten coach who's was running in Jed Fish. So I think that the Pac-12 teams are really just going to fit right in. They would have already fit well in the Big Ten East in any previous year. They had similar coaches, recruited similar guys. You're going to recognize other names like Josh Connerly for Oregon. It's a guy Michigan was after, right? There's just it's not going to be. It's not like we were in two different worlds here. Right? The Pac-12 and the Big Ten already had a lot of crossover, shared a lot of coaches, shared a lot of recruits, recruited in each other's areas. It's a more natural fit as far as that's concerned than people realize. It's just the travel's going to be harder. The familiarity is going to be a little weird, and I think it's just going to feel weird. Like when you get a Rutgers versus Oregon game, it's like what are these people doing together? But as far as the teams themselves, they're fine. Like Washington felt like a Big Ten team already. Oregon looks like a good challenge for. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten this year. I think USC is probably the oddball, but we needed an oddball.
Craig Ross?
Yeah, I think Oregon and Ohio State are probably the two favorites for the Big Ten this year. I think Oregon's going to be really good. I think Ohio State plays at Oregon. I think that may be, one of the big 2 or 3 games this year in conference and go a long way towards deciding what happens. So, UCLA, I think, is a bit down. I think they may struggle. Washington, even though they lost a lot, I think will be a good competitive Big Ten team, although not at the level probably of Michigan and Ohio State and Oregon. And USC is a wild card to me. I just don't know. I think they're if you look at their roster, they have a lot of people who were, very highly regarded, but whether they can put something together, piece of defense together in particular, is quite problematic at this point. But it wouldn't surprise me if they do well this year even. So
yeah, I just wonder if they'll hold up any of those teams based on what we saw, how we saw Michigan just destroy Washington at the line of scrimmage. They just abused them. And maybe I watched both Washington, Oregon games, and Oregon has a really, really fast and talented team, but I didn't come away from that thinking they were super physical. They were one of those games. They had a big rushing game. I can't remember if it was the first or the second one. I think they may have rushed for high 100s or 200 yards in a game if memory doesn't escape me. But
I think there was one game where Knicks escaped a bunch. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't remember them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. But I don't know that they'll be able to deal with Michigan's just dominance up front. That to me is different. It certainly was, to me, the biggest difference in the national championship game. Now, will that translate to this year? Even though I expect Mason Graham and KG to be even better, Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore to be even better. My question is, can they be as dominant for the entire game, not knowing if the depth will establish itself as being as reliable as last year? I suspect it's going to be better than a lot of outsiders expect, but will it be on par with last year? It's almost virtually impossible for it to be on par with last year. So what will that mean to the bottom line against a much tougher schedule is one of my bigger questions.
Yeah. I mean, people keep on getting mad that Wink is going to blitz a little bit more, and I think they're overstating it anyway. But that's going to be part of the strategy too. That if you don't want to get to your second, your second string that much, you'll force the issue, right? Like make them throw downfield, make the drive shorter, and if you can play a couple snaps with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant up front and get to the quarterback, get them in 3rd and 14, they're not making that first down, and then your offense is back on the field. And then the opposite side, Michigan's going to grind out these games. You're not going to see a lot of big downfield throws. You might see big runs. I think that you're actually probably going to have a more explosive running game this year than we've had since maybe 2021. Just because Orgy's legs are going to be part of the offense. But I think that in general, Sharon Moore is going to want to grind these games down, limit the number of snaps for his defensive players, so you don't have to get to the second team that much.
Yeah, it shall be interesting. I didn't respond to what you guys had to say about USC, but I'm really interested to see how Lincoln Riley does without like the best quarterback in college football. Like, what does he do without the number one guy that everyone wants? This is foreign territory for him. In addition to what you were talking about, Brian, having to break in a new defensive coordinator, but can they be this year offensively what they have been? I think the jury's out on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think USC is an enigma. I could see them going either way. I could see them being really good. I don't know. Do you guys know who the quarterback is likely to be there? I don't even know.
Probably Miller Moss.
Yeah,
who was decent in back to pro.
He threw for like 5 or 6 touchdowns in a bowl game or something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard to tell what he is right now because he hasn't played that much. But PFF loved him. That's really all I know about him at this point.
Yeah, I don't think he's his last two guys though. Maybe he will. Maybe Miller Moss will be the last two. I would be surprised if he's that good. Time will tell, of course. But I think the Lincoln Riley, if you were going to be making a move to the Big Ten, I think this is going to be a rougher year than it would have been had it been like next year when he already had his quarterback established at that point. Last year, I think he would have liked it because you got the number one quarterback in the country, even though they didn't fare that well in the Pac-12 even, or next year. This year, I think they're going to take some lumps.
Are they in worse shape than most of the conference at quarterback? I mean, who's the best?
I think it's a relative assessment. They're in better shape than a lot of teams, but not in the shape that Lincoln Riley is used to being in. He's used to having the best quarterback in the country. That's been it, or one of them. Is anyone saying that that's Miller Moss right now? I haven't seen anyone saying that. So how does he fare when he doesn't have one of the best quarterbacks in the country going into the equation? I think is a big question that will help determine their outlook. We'll see here in not too long.
The interesting thing is the way it's the relativity, right? Like USC's got to have the best quarterback in the country. He played as much for USC last year as Aiden Childs did for Oregon State. And you ask a Michigan State fan right now, they think Aiden Childs is going to be the best quarterback in the Big Ten. Now, that's Michigan State, wish casting is in there, but it's interesting to me to see the relativity there of what USC needs to do to win versus where everyone else in the conference kind of feels about their quarterback. I mean, Michigan is like, okay, we got everything. Can Orgy hit a pass? and you got Ohio State thinking like, okay, we got this running guy. Are we going to play Chip Kelly, or are we going to try to bring Julian Sand along faster than we need to, right? Like that's where everybody else is. And as far as where you want to be in your quarterback situation, you have a guy who's been in your system for 4 years. He was the backup to the best quarterback in the country. He played really well in the bowl game. That's not a bad setup.
Right. No, I agree. Michigan has more uncertainty. We got people in the chat saying I still predict that Jack Tuttle will start this season. Will be the starter in the first game this season. So
I think Jack. I don't think so. I think Alex Orji is going to be the quarterback. I think that he's not going to be JJ McCarthy, and I think that people are underrating how important JJ was last year. That if you look at his performance first quarter through third quarter, his numbers stack up with anybody. It's just he wasn't slinging the ball late because Michigan was already up and they put him away. And also, if you look at a lot of the plays that they had, he got to throw underneath a lot more than people remember. We forget about all those passes that were just open for 6 yards to Cornelius Johnson or something. He threw a lot of slants last year. He threw a lot of outs last year, and those are open because they're respecting his arm downfield. I think people are going to play Michigan a lot more man this year. They're going to say, okay, we can match our athletes up against Michigan's receivers and see if Orji can hit a window downfield, even if he has leverage. And until he proves that he can, you're going to see, them stacking the box against us.
Yeah, I tell you what, he's going to love to see man coverage, not just because of the one-on-one shots that he would get out of that, but boy, if he ever breaks contain, he's going to be running a long, long way for a long time if that's the strategy that they come out with against him. So again, time will tell on that too. Fellas, it is always a situation where I feel like we're running out of time when it comes to the MGoBlog Roundtable, but that's where we are at this point. I want to give you a chance to plug your yearbook because I know you guys are working feverishly on that. Your commemorative piece that you're putting together.
Victors. We call it Victors.
For the national championship. That's what you call it, Victors?
Yeah, and it's become a 3-year book.
Okay.
Because we couldn't not do 2021 and 2022. And the players who were part of it, because that's part of the story. And Brian just submitted the Blake Corum write-up, which is incredible. We just got the Stars wrote the forward. That's what I'm ending today. It's putting more into it than we realized, and that's why I want people to understand who've already pre-ordered that it's going to take a while for us to get it out, but that's because we're putting a lot of writing into it, a lot of the original writing into it. We're going back into the old articles, into the old end of the game and saying like, okay, here's what we thought at the time, and here's kind of what we think about what we thought then. So it's going to be a very, I hope it's going to be the best thing you ever own with as far as Michigan. I think it's just going to be something it's going to be out all the time, and you're always going to want to open this thing up again.
Outstanding. All right. Looking forward to it. Until next week, folks, thanks for watching and listening to another edition of the MGoBlog Roundtable. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 10.